It's time for us to go ahead and get started with our study this evening as we are continuing to work our way through the Old Testament and spending some time focusing really on highlights as we go through, not necessarily to give a blow-by-blow account, but to hit some of the really important sections that we find, which we have made our way from creation through two of the five, I would say, key passages that move the story or the narrative along in the Old Testament. Genesis chapter 3, which is where what happens? Okay, sin. Death through sin. And so you kind of have then this prologue of sorts to the scriptures with the creation account, the fall account, then you have the genealogies, the flood account, the Babylon account, all of that leading to Genesis chapter 12, where our second key passage, where you have the promises to Abraham. What three promises did we focus on? All right, nation, land, seed, that they would become a great nation would be given the land, and then through them, or through his seed, all the families of the earth would be blessed. You follow the patriarchs through the story, Joseph's story. They come down, they're enslaved in Egypt. We talked about the Exodus out of Egypt, which brought us to our third key passage of the Old Testament, Exodus chapter 24, where what happens? All right, they enter into a covenant with God. They become a nation in Exodus chapter 24. And then we, from there, we talked about the golden calf incident, which happens almost right away. It's the very next story after this. There in chapter 32 through 34. Then the rest of their time at Sinai, how when God took them to take the land, what did they do? Well, when he said, go up into the land, what did they say? No, they refused. And they said, we'd rather die in the wilderness. So what did God say? Okay, exactly, Joshua. That's exactly right. You can do your idea. If you want to die in the wilderness, I'll let you die in the wilderness. Your children will go into the land. They do under Joshua. So you have then the book of Joshua describes the conquest of the land. That is where they go in and defeat the armies. But they still haven't settled the land. They haven't driven out the inhabitants. Judges is supposed to describe that, but in the time frame of the judges, are they successful? No. Judges is characterized really by the word failure. In fact, a lot of times I tell people, if you want to think about the time frame of the judges in one word, don't think judge, think failure, because that ultimately is what the book of Judges is all about, their failure. And it really is all about this phrase, which is key in the last 5 chapters of the book of Judges, where you have two narratives that are presented. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and every man did what? Man, good job, Joshua. You nailed it. Excellent. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. He got the wording and everything. That is exactly right. This is what Judges is really all about. And we introduced it last week. We're not going to go into it. We're going to save it. But in these last two narratives, you are primed to begin seeing there was a man in the hill country of Ephraim, and what do you immediately think? This isn't going to be good. Good job, Samuel. That's right. You are primed now to see if a story begins with a man from the hill country of Ephraim, you kind of go, oh no, not again, because these are really bad stories, especially if these narratives might contain such cities as Bethlehem or Gibeah or Jebus, the city of the Jebusites, or Jabesh Gilead. Where are these cities going to be important? Oh, they will be coming up. And what book? First Samuel, right? You know what? I'm getting into it. And I said we're not going to do it yet. We're going to save it. So we're going to save it. We're going to save it for when we get into First Samuel and we start talking about this. Now, the interesting thing, we talked about it last week. If you are reading through a Hebrew Bible, that is the way that the Jews and modern day Jews, and the way that they would outline or construct, I guess you could say, books of the Bible, the order that they place them in, what comes after Judges? I didn't hear. The United Kingdom? Yes. All right, very good. That does come after the Judges. Excellent. Someone is learning her timeline. Good job, Olivia. Very good. Oh, who was it? Was that Anna Lee? Okay, she's sitting right behind Olivia, so I heard a sweet little voice over there. Oh, and Everest said it too. Excellent. That's awesome. That is great. All right, the Wrens are killing it tonight. That is fantastic. Good job. But what book of the Bible, though? All right, it goes straight into 1 Samuel. Well, that's really odd, because with me, when I turn from Judges, what story do I run into? Ruth. All right. Why would that be the case? Because Ruth is after Judges? Yep, that's what we find in our Bibles. All right, very good. What'd you say, Kelly? It's easy, makes the song easier? Yeah, that it does. Yeah, for those of you who use the song, I guess, to learn. I didn't use the song to learn the Old Testament. New Testament, I did. Lorraine? You did, okay, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people did. Why is Ruth, in our Bibles, why is Ruth placed where it is? All right, chronologically, it fits in the time of the Judges, right? How do we know that? All right, Sean read the very first words of Ruth, in the days, in the time of the Judges, right? So we know that this fits chronologically in this time frame. So it makes sense that it would fit there. And we're going to talk about the ending in just a few minutes once we get there. So there are very good reasons for us to take Ruth and slot it where it is. Why might Ruth be in a different section? I think we mentioned it last week, so I'm going to test y'all's memory here. Why might they place Ruth where they do in the Hebrew Bible? All right, very good, Josie. It falls after Proverbs. Ruth falls after Proverbs. And what you find at the end of Proverbs, Proverbs 31, is what? We think Proverbs 31, we obviously start verse 10 because the first 9 verses aren't really part of Proverbs 31, right? Proverbs 31 is all about the worthy woman, virtuous woman, the worthy woman who can find, right? I mean, that whole thing. And yet in Ruth, we find that word actually shows up twice, describing whom? Ruth and Boaz. The word worthy, not worthy woman. Worthy woman does not describe either of them. But the word worthy describes Ruth and describes Boaz. And so you see this ending of Proverbs fitting in. That being the case, and understanding that this was originally placed, whereas we place it in what slot of books? If you were, you have the 5 books of the law, and then the next section we call the what? Books of history. And then we have the books of wisdom, poetry, right? I mean, those are the next ones. That's the way we divide it up. The Hebrew Bible is divided up differently. The section that we call history, they consider part of the prophets. They would consider it the prophets, understanding that it was prophets who wrote these various books. But then there are some books that we call books of history that aren't in the prophets for them. They put it in a section called the writings, which has, yes, all of the wisdom books, the books of writings, such as the Psalms, the Proverbs, and such. But Ruth falls into that section. It's not treated as if it is a book of the prophets in the chronological history of Israel. Chronicles as well falls in the writings and not in what we would call the prophets. So I would suggest that as we are reading through this, we are reading it not necessarily as a history book, but as a writing, as one of the writings. It's one of those things. I'm not saying, don't hear what I'm not saying, right? Do I believe that Ruth is an historical figure? Yes. Do I believe Boaz is an historical figure? Yes. Do I believe the events of this book really happened? Yes. Everybody's clear on that, right? Okay, thank you. At the same time, this book is part of the writings. I think we need to be very careful of taking our 21st century, just absolute historical, scientific way of looking at it and imposing that upon the text. That'll be meaningful in just a few minutes as we look into the story of Ruth itself. That being the case, I think there are things we're supposed to see through here, connections that we are supposed to make as this story is outlined. All right, so let's get into Ruth with the time that we have this evening, and let's talk about this story. How many of y'all have studied Ruth before? All right, a lot of hands. That's good. I was hoping that was something that has been studied before. How many of y'all have studied Ruth before in the context of one of the greatest love stories in the Bible? Really? Not very many hands are up right now. I want to see a hand. Have you studied Ruth before in the context of a love story? Really? Y'all haven't? That's weird. Usually, that's the way Ruth is portrayed, as a love story. I guess maybe some of y'all are like, there's no way I'm raising my hand if he's setting it up like this. I know his MO. I know what he's going to do. I'm not going to look the fool here. Yeah, Ruth is not a love story. And I think it's important that we understand there is no love story involved. There are no actions in the book of Ruth that are done out of any kind of romantic love between one person or another. None of that can be found here. And I think it does a huge disservice to the story, to Boaz, when you think about it. By the way, love story as in man and woman romantic love story. Different from the Ruth to Naomi type of devotion and loyalty, and I think love that's demonstrated in that. But to say that this is a love story between Boaz and Ruth does a disservice to what is actually taking place with this story. All right, now let's talk about our cast. Who are our main characters? Ruth, yes, thank you. Who else? Naomi. All right, Boaz, Naomi. And really, that pretty much sums it up. These are the three main characters of this story. What do we know about Ruth? What's that? Okay, very good. She is from Moab. Now, that's really important. Why is the fact that she is a Moabite, why is that really important? What does Deuteronomy 23 and verse 3 tell us about Moabites? You don't have to pull that out of thin air. I told you that so you could turn over there and take a look at it. And now I'm hoping I gave you the right verse. All right, who shall not enter into the... All right, Ammonites, neither Ammonites nor Moabites can enter into the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. And yet, here we are. She is from Moab. Yeah, I would have to go back and just verify. He went to the land of Midian, but she may have been a Moabite living in Midian. I'm not sure. Okay, yeah, and that very well could be the case. Now, it is, I think, important. Where is Moab? Up here. Where is it? Someone point to it for me? Yes, thank you. Very good. That's right. Yeah, around in this area, down here, the southeast, it's east of the Dead Sea. This region over here is what you would consider to be Moab. Now, let's just leave that for right now. What about Boaz? What do we know about Boaz? Okay. All right, so a higher person in society. I'm going to say it's not what you said, but he was a good guy, right? And he is well known and respected in society. He is probably a little bit older, as the case might be. And there's no indication that he has married or anything like that. So he's a good guy. We'll just kind of leave that. What about Naomi? Okay, is she a good person? What does her name mean? All right, Naomi means pleasant. So, anyway, we're kind of introducing ourselves to these people. Let's see just how this story plays out. During the time of the judges, there was a what? All right, there is a famine in the land. And so what happened? They left. A man left where? All right, a man left Bethlehem, which, by the way, what does Bethlehem mean? Okay, bread town, yeah. All right, Beit is house, right? So yeah, bread town or house of bread, is kind of the idea here. He left the house of bread, or bread town. I kind of like that. That has a nice fun ring to it. Bread town. He left there to do what? No. To get bread, right? So you have a guy, Bethlehem, roughly around there. He up and leaves instead of what? Okay, waiting until the famine's done, or What's the alternative? Okay, very good. Trusting God. All right, this is an act, and this is an act, by the way, that you see in Genesis multiple times, that when there is a famine, multiple times the answer is to leave the place where they're supposed to be, and in Genesis they often go down to Egypt or to another place in order to escape it. And by the way, in those Genesis stories, ignore the Joseph story for the time being because they went to get food, but they didn't actually leave their place. But in the other Genesis stories, do good things happen? No. All right? You're supposed to have this kind of recollection. They leave, instead of trusting God, they leave the place of bread in order to find bread somewhere else. So, okay, well, so a man left Bethlehem in Judah with his wife, his 2 sons, to stay in the territory of Moab for a while. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. And the names of the 2 sons were, and this is a point where I don't know if these are actually their names or if this is the story's retelling and giving you names. Does anybody know what Mahlon and Chilion actually mean? If I'm remembering correctly, and I might be, disease and destruction, I believe are what the names mean. And so these might simply be names that the author is providing for these 2 people whose real names are kind of irrelevant to the story. They're meaningless. They don't move the story along, help the story in any way, because they're only there for what purpose? For disease and destruction, right? They only come into the narrative in order to die. And that is the only part that they play in this story. But they married. So, as you move forward, we all know the story. Mahlon, Chilion, they both die. Elimelech dies. And now you have Ruth, who is there with her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. Now, she finds out that she decides that she needs to return. And what does she tell her daughters-in-law? Okay. Hey, Josh, let's let other people answer for just a little bit. You're doing fantastic, bud, okay? You're doing a great job, but we're going to let some other folks, okay, bud? All right. Excellent. Thank you. All right. She tells them they need to just go back. Why? Okay, to her own people. Okay, very practical reason. They don't have any children yet. And if they stay with her, will they have any children? No. It can't happen. She says, even if I were to give birth right now, which isn't going to happen, even if I did, are you going to sit around and wait for him to get to an age where you can marry him? It's like, it doesn't make any sense. Just go and do your thing. So one turns back, the other one does not. And this is where you get that beautiful passage that is often used. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was used in our wedding ceremony when we were married. But it is it's actually not talking about a man and a woman and their relationship. This is Ruth's connection with Naomi, her mother-in-law. She says, "Do not plead with me to abandon you, return and not follow you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me and do so severely if anything but death separates you and me." So she convinces her, and they come back to Bethlehem. When they come back to Bethlehem, everyone says, "Hey, it's what? It's what? Hey, it's pleasant coming back into town, right? Translate the name, right? Put this, what they would have heard as they were saying her name. It's pleasant. Pleasant has returned to town. This is great. And what is her answer? Do not call me pleasant. Instead, call me bitter, right? Translate the names because, they were hearing it translated. They weren't hearing proper names to some degree. They're hearing this. He says, no longer call me pleasant. Call me bitter. Why? Okay, because she's lost everything. And this is one of those times where you look. She says, don't call me pleasant, call me bitter. For this is verse 20, because the Almighty has made me very bitter. Why is she bitter? Yeah, but what does she say? Well, even before that, but yeah, I mean, that's part of it. Okay, well, she says, this is what God has done to me. I am bitter because God has acted adversely to me. And then, as Julia was saying, I went away full, but the Lord brought me back empty. What's interesting about that statement? Why did they go away? Because their stomachs were empty, right? They weren't full. But she says, in general, I was full. My life was full, and now I have come back empty. She says, I left with so much, and I've come back, and I've got nothing. Who's standing right beside her, by the way? Did she come back empty? I mean, put yourself in that position, Ruth's position, for just a second. She says, woe is me, God has hurt me in so many ways. I am bitter, I left full, and I don't have anything. I come back with nothing. And I mean, Ruth, by the way, what has Ruth done? Left her family, left her home, left her gods, left her people, left everything. I mean, everything. She has left her identity and she has hitched herself to this woman. And how does this woman react towards her? It's almost as if she's not there. I left full, but I came back with nothing. While she has Ruth right there. And she says, I am bitter. The Lord, why do you call me pleasant? Because the Lord has opposed me. The Almighty has afflicted me. So Naomi came back from the territory of Moab with her daughter-in-law Ruth the Moabitess. And they arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Now, again, read the story as the story is written. Is it an unbelievably, incredibly loss for her to lose her husband and her two sons? Yes. In no way, shape, or form am I denying that. At the same time, how is the author trying to get us to see this? He's getting us to see that here is a woman who is coming back and is blaming God and saying, this is all God's fault, and I've got absolutely nothing. And then the very next phrase, she came back with her daughter-in-law. I mean, can you see how that is, those two things are juxtaposed by the author to get you to get a good sense of Naomi and Naomi's character and who and what Naomi is. Now, let's keep on going. Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a prominent man of noble character. Noble character. Worthy character. Right? This is our word that we find in Proverbs 31. So a man of noble character from Elimelech's family, his name was Boaz. So Ruth the Moabitess asked Naomi, will you allow me to go into the fields, gather fallen grain behind someone with whom I find favor? And she said, go. So she happened to be in a portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was from Elimelech's family. Now, I think we're supposed to see providence plays a little something in here, and that this story is working out by virtue of the providence of God. She just happened to be in the portion of the field belonging to Boaz. That's the kind of language that you're supposed to see the providence of God at work. So Boaz comes in, and by the way, how does he treat his servants? Very well. He immediately, the first thing that he says to them is a greeting with a benediction of the Lord, right? The Lord, may the Lord be with you. May God's blessings be upon you, is kind of the idea. And this is somebody who is treated in kind by his servants. So they reply, the Lord bless you. All right, immediately you're supposed to see Boaz is a good guy. And in the very first thing, I mean, he has a noble character, right? He has a worthy character. But he is immediately responding with those around him, invoking the name of Yahweh. And so that's how all of this starts. And then he asks about this woman. They said she's the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the territory of Moab, and asked, will you let me gather fallen grain among the bundles behind the harvesters? By the way, what is that all about? Gathering, is she like hoping that while they're gathering stuff, they accidentally drop a few that she's able to pick up? Hold on, there's a mic coming to you. It's working its way over there. Mike's not here. We have somebody filling in.
Yeah. I'm not positive, but I think they were supposed to leave some amount of their harvest kind of preparing to drop it on the ground for those who would come behind them.
Yeah, it was written in the law. This is a welfare system that is built into the law of Moses. It was against the law to harvest everything in your field. You were supposed to leave corners, and certain areas you're supposed to leave these alone for the stranger, the alien, the orphan, the widow, the people who aren't able to take care of themselves. This is a welfare system, and it is built into the law of Moses itself, and that's exactly what they're doing, and it works. I mean, she's out here, and she is gathering this. Boaz, finding out who she is, tells her, listen, you will be taken care of. We will make sure that you have plenty. Don't bother going to any other field. You will be fine right here. And basically says all your needs will be taken care of here. And verse 10, she fell face down, bowed to the ground, and said, why have I found favor with you? So that you notice me even though I'm a foreigner. And verse 11, Boaz answered her, it's because I have seen your beauty and your character, and I have fallen in love with you. Right? Oh, is that not what you guys have? No, let me read that again. Oh, because of everything you have done for your mother-in-law since your husband's death has been fully reported to me, how you left your father and mother in your native land, and how you came to a people you didn't previously know. May the Lord reward you for what you have done, and may you receive a full reward from the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Why is he honoring her in such a way? Kevin? All right, because of her faithfulness to her mother-in-law. Kevin has more, so go ahead and bring the mic up. All right, go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, I was also going to just note that based upon Naomi's insistence that her name be changed, that the servants did not report that, it appears in verse 6, to Boaz when he asked. They use her name, not what she came back requesting.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And when she says, no longer call me pleasant, call me bitter, I don't think she literally meant, I want an official name change, go find my birth certificate, let me scratch out the one, put the other. It's part of a pity party type of a statement. It's not a literal, hey, I want you to call me this from now on, so much as a, don't use that name around me because I'm not pleasant anymore. God has made me bitter. That type of a thing. And as Kevin points out, nobody's changing her name, right? Nobody's like, oh, okay, well, you want to be called bitter, fine. They still call her, by the name pleasant. But you see with that her attitude. So, as Kevin said, it's based on the way that she has acted towards her mother-in-law. She has acted in a worthy way, and he will reward that because he has a worthy character. And so, verse 13, my Lord, she said, I found favor with you, for you've comforted and encouraged your servant, even though I'm not like one of the female servants. So, let's see. He leaves certain things for her, make sure that she has extra beyond what she even needs. She gathers and she takes home quite a bit. Verse 19, her mother-in-law said, where'd you gather barley today? Where did you work? May the Lord bless the man who noticed you. Yeah, she says, this is really good. You got quite a haul. Someone has taken notice of you. And she says, the name of the man I worked with today is Boaz. And Naomi says, may the Lord bless him because he's not abandoned his kindness to the living or the dead. The man is a close relative, one of our family redeemers. What does that mean? A family redeemer. Kelly?
There was a system set up where so the tribal lands wouldn't be lost to outsiders, and it involved a succession of people who would be in line to inherit the land or redeem the land if there was some kind of debt that needed to be paid off to not lose that property from the family, the tribal lands.
Yeah. This goes to, it's referred to as the Levirate Law. And the Levirate Law requires that if you have brothers and one of them is to marry, and he is killed before being able to produce an offspring, it is the duty of the brother to produce an offspring in his name so that the name can continue. And this is the Levirate Law. This is the idea of redemption. And that then includes taking in, the larger picture of redemption that Kelly is talking about, which includes, I think the Levirate Law is a part of that, is taking in, the families, I'm trying to remember the word you used, tribal inheritance? Is that the word that you said?
Yeah, the tribal
Tribal
lands.
lands, their specific inheritance, and keeping it for them and keeping it going through the generations. It says that he is one of our family redeemers. And this will become really important. So let's move into, usually I have a little more time than what we have when I go through Ruth, so I need to speed up just a little bit. Into chapter 3, Ruth's mother-in-law said to her, my daughter, shouldn't I find rest for you so that you will be taken care of? Isn't Boaz a relative? Have you been working with his female servants? This evening he's going to be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfumed oil, wear your best clothes, go down to the threshing floor, but don't let the men know that you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, notice the place where he's lying, go in, uncover his feet and lie down, and he will explain to you what you should do. What is she telling Ruth to do? First of all, what's the significance of them being out on the threshing floor overnight? Because it does have some significance. What happens out on the threshing floor overnight? Let's see. Verse 7. What do y'all have in verse 7? What do y'all have in verse 7? What happens?
Boaz is going to eat and drink, and he's going to lay down at the end of the heap of corn.
You don't have anything after drink?
Well, I didn't read exactly. And was merry.
His heart was merry. Anybody else have anything different from that? I'm just curious. His heart was cheerful? Okay. All right. Festive spirit, festive kind of experience. There may have been a little merriment, if you catch my drift, with the eating and drinking. And what does Naomi tell Ruth to do in this moment? All right, present yourself, clean yourself up to where you are presenting yourself in a certain kind of a way, and pull the cover on his bed and lay down at his feet and wait for him to tell you what you're doing next. Right? Now, it doesn't take too much of an imagination to understand what Naomi assumes the next thing is going to be. This is really important that we see this picture because Ruth is from where? Moab. By the way, where does Moab come from? Lot. Lot's from Lot, he and his wife got together and came up with Moab. Oh, his daughter. Well, that sounds wrong. Why would he have gone through this experience with his daughter? Because they got him drunk and then laid down with him at the night, right? Does this story have any connections? Do we find any points to connect to Genesis chapter 19 and this story? In other words, Naomi is almost like saying, hey, you know what? You're a Moabite. Why don't you go act like one? Because this is where you came from. This is what you do. She's telling Ruth, go act like a Moabite. Basically, that's what this whole thing is set up. Naomi's the one who's thinking like a Moabite. What actually happens? She follows through. She goes and she lays down at his feet. And what's the end result of that? Boaz is a good guy. And, well, Ruth is, does she press it? No. She does what she's told to do, but she's not going to press the matter any further. Does anything happen between Ruth and Boaz this evening? No. Naomi wants her to act like a Moabite, but Naomi is thinking more like a Moabite than Ruth is. And Boaz is too good of a guy to allow this to happen. By the way, what stays Boaz? What's his biggest concern? What's that? Yeah. Now, again, if this is a love story, does that matter? Not really, but it's not a love story. He basically says, hey, you know what? You could have gone to all kinds of young men and found them, but I appreciate the fact that you have come to me as a kinsman redeemer, the relative, but I'm not the closest one. There is somebody else. And if we're going to do this, we're going to do this directly, completely according to the law. And I'm not going to stand in the way of this other person, right? We're going to do it this way. In the morning, he says, look, just stay here, and we'll just pretend like you just stayed the night collecting. Gives her plenty of grain to carry home, so it looks like she has been there collecting and wasn't there for other purposes, to save her reputation, and sends her away with that. He goes to the gates, as we are now moving the story along, and he finds some of the elders. Why does he go to the gates? That seems weird, doesn't it? Kevin?
The gates where business happens, where the things of the city take place on a daily basis. It's where commerce and trade happens on a daily basis.
Yeah, exactly. The gates are kind of like the what we would think of as like the city center. It's where all the activity take place. It's where the elders of the city. Remember Proverbs 31? The woman does all of this so that her husband can do what? Sit at the gates. Be that type of a person who is the one who leads at the gates. So this is the scenario. He goes, he waits for the other man who is the closest kinsman redeemer, and says, hey, we got to talk about something. Finds some of the elders of the city. They talk about it. And he says, hey, just want to point out, here in verse 3, he said to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has returned from the territory of Moab, is selling the portion of the field that belonged to our brother Elimelech. Thought I should inform you, buy it back in the presence of those seated here, in the presence of the elders of my people. If you want to redeem it, do it. If you do not want to redeem it, tell me so that I will know, because there isn't anyone other than you to redeem it. I'm next after you. And this goes to what Kelly was talking about before, the purchase of the inheritance. And this is in times of financial struggles and problems that you could sell it off. But was that a permanent sell-off? No. It was until when?
70 years.
All right, the year of Jubilee, right? The 70 years has taken place. So, yeah. I'm sorry. 50. Yeah, 77s. Yeah, it's 49. So, yeah, the year of Jubilee would be every 77s is what I was thinking. So every 49 years or 50 years, depending on how you read that. So this would be the 7 sevens. Anyway, that's a totally different discussion. I can go through it in my head. The 77s, is the next thing, but that's okay. So every 50 years or so, it would revert back and says, you are the closest one. And he says, sure, I'll redeem it. No big deal. And then he says, oh, yeah, by the way, as part of this is the levirate law. On the day you buy the field from Naomi, you will acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the deceased man, to perpetuate the man's name on his property. So as a part of this is that levirate law that we talked about. And what does the Redeemer say in verse 6? I can't do it. I've got too many other things. This would cause a problem, inheritance issues, other things, bringing another woman on board. And it's like, you know what? I can't do this. Now, the interesting thing about the levirate law is that if somebody refused to fulfill their duty in the levirate law, their name is supposed to be marked down and repeated from generation to generation to generation, so that everyone would know that this individual did not fulfill his duty, and it would shame him, and his family for generations on end. Why is that interesting? Okay, but who? Who's willing to do it? Yeah, but who? Yeah. His name is not recorded in a law in which it very specifically states, in the law itself, it says to mark down his name so that from generation to generation it will be remembered that he did not do what he was supposed to do. In this very law, you have an unnamed man who does not fulfill this law in this story. I find that fascinating, that they don't record the name of this individual. And I think that there's a reason for that. So instead of making you all play the Guess Chris Huntley's Answer game because we're running out of time, I think this has everything to do with recognizing Boaz is a better candidate for it. It's not that he doesn't want to fulfill the duty, and it's not that he would not have done it if Boaz hadn't been available. I think he just says, look, you are much better suited in your situation and what you're doing. You would be able to take care of Ruth and take care of this Naomi and take care of this land better than I could. And I think it's actually a grace towards Naomi and a grace towards Ruth that he passes on this and gives it to Boaz. He's acting in their best interest, which also happens to be his best interest, yes, but I think it's their best interest as well. Does that make sense? And so the reason, the shamefulness of refusing to do so is not applicable here, because it actually works out for the better if he allows it to go to the next redeemer instead of him. And so I think all the way around this makes sense, which is why it's almost kind of a farce to some degree, where you have the whole sandal and everything else that's involved right here. The Redeemer removed his sandal and said to Boaz, buy back the property yourself. And this is all a whole lot worse in the law itself. But they're just going through the routine, and it's not that big of a deal because Boaz is actually the better option. Now, what we need to do is make sure that we cover the end of this. Boaz took Ruth. She became his wife. He slept with her, and the Lord granted conception. She gave birth to a son. And the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you without a family redeemer today. May his name become well known in Israel. He will renew your life, sustain you in your old age. Indeed, your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. And the neighbor women said, a son has been born to whom? To whom? To Naomi. Why Naomi? That seems weird. Because it's what?
It replaces her dead son.
Yeah, it's the levirate law. The child is supposed to now be seen as the child of her dead son, which is hers, right? So if the story, if this is a child, and someone help me out here, which one was her husband out of Mahlon and Chilion? Yes. All right, Mahlon, thank you. All right, so you have Ruth and Mahlon, and I don't know if I'm spelling that correctly or not, but I'm out of time to double check it. So you have Ruth and Mahlon here. He didn't produce a child, so Boaz is supposed to produce this child for him, which means this is Naomi's grandchild. Everybody see that? And it's now legally supposed to be viewed as a child of Ruth and Mahlon. Everybody understand that? This is officially Ruth and Mahlon's child, which means this is officially Naomi's grandchild. Here's where it gets interesting. Here, verse 18, are the family records of Perez. By the way, one more thing to say. A son has been born to pleasant. She's no longer bitter. She's now pleasant, is kind of the idea. Naomi took the child and placed him on her lap. Man, we're going to go just a few minutes over because these are things we're supposed to see. When do you see this behavior that somebody will take a child, place it on her lap, and claim it as hers? Okay, Sarah, right? Or Rachel and Leah with the concubine type of thing. In other words, Naomi, who is she cutting out by doing this? She's cutting Ruth out completely by doing this. Taking the child, placing it on her lap. This is reminiscent to the concubine behavior back in Genesis. Remember, we're seeing all kinds of Genesis connections through the story. We're supposed to. She is finding her fulfillment in the fact that now her son Mahlon has this child, and she claims this is now mine. She placed it on her lap and then became his nanny. And everyone says, a son is now born to whom? Not Ruth, but Naomi. This is Naomi's child. Now, it ends, and everyone read along with me, chapter 4, verse 18. These are the family records of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Mahlon. Mahlon fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. Jesse fathered David. Everybody read like that? No? What? Was there a mistake there? Why? What was messed up there? Yeah, disease. When I said use the translation, he took me to heart there. Very good. Thank you. Yeah. What about God? Does God say, this is Naomi's child? Because in the official declaration, the official genealogy that's tacked on to the end, is Naomi and Elimelech in there? No. Naomi tries to squeeze herself in, tries to claim this child as her own. She said, God, I can't believe you did this to me. This is awful. You did this. This is horrible. And then an offspring is produced between Boaz and Ruth, and she takes it, puts it on her lap, becomes a thing, and says, well, now this is mine, and everyone proclaims this is mine. And then God tacks on a little bit on the end, and he says, oh, by the way, here's the official genealogy. And I'm sorry, Naomi, but neither you, nor Elimelech, nor Mahlon, none of you are involved. This child is not yours. This child is officially Boaz's child. Let's throw the Levirate law out, because that doesn't matter here. This is now the child of Boaz and Ruth. And the ultimate ending is what? How does Ruth end? With what word? David. This is David's origin, part of his origin story. And this is what leads up to it, with all of this drama that took place over whose line is he officially. Naomi tries to cut Ruth out. God says, who has, by the way, the last say, says, no. This is theirs. And ultimately, this is going to lead to the king of the kings of Israel. Yeah, Kevin?
Excuse me. Some about legitimizing this birth by Ruth being a Moabite and putting him outside of the nation. Nothing
indicates that, but I can see I can see kind of where she is claiming it as hers, trying to remove the Moabite taint from it. Is that what you're kind of saying?
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And maybe there is something to that in what she is attempting to do. It's an interesting thought, but very clearly, because you have the Moabite, which does come with problems as far as genealogies are concerned for them. All right. Very good. That's an excellent comment. That's a really good thought. I'd have to think some more on it. All right, so this then concludes the story of Ruth. And then next week we're going to start into some more fascinating stuff as we get into 1 Samuel. All right, I'm about 5 to 7 minutes over what I normally am, so we will go ahead and turn this over to Richard. Thanks, guys.